End at 6 o'clock. Before you leave, you're going to need your ID card to swipe on the way out. There'll be 3 locations for swiping. These 2 doors over here to your left, and the one directly behind you, the farthest one to that side. So make sure you leave through one of those 3 doors to swipe your cards to get recorded for attendance.
Hello again. Now that you've seen me, you know what I wear every day, so you can catch me in the corridors in my robes. No, I don't wear the robes. You may not recognize me without my robes. I don't know. But anyway, if I could have your attention, please, as we bring this program to fruition. So I am delighted this evening to be able to introduce you to Dr. Pietra Rivoli. Dr. Rivoli teaches finance and international business in the undergraduate, graduate, and executive programs at Georgetown University's McDonough School of Business, as well as serving as Deputy Dean of the school. She is renowned and is an award-winning expert in social justice issues in international business and China, and regularly leads MBA residencies in China. Her recent book, The Travels of a T-Shirt in the Global Economy, has been widely acclaimed in both the popular press and the academic community as a path-breaking study of globalization, including being named one of the best business books of the year by the Financial Times, Booz Allen Hamilton, Foreign Affairs, Library Journal, and by Amazon.com, and was also named as a finalist for the inaugural Financial Times Goldman Sachs Book of the Year Award. The book has been translated into 14 languages. This book has been required reading in the Global Supply Chain Management concentration for 3 years. And last year, the first year of our Gateway program was required reading for the Global Foundations of Organization and Business course. Dr. Rivoli has a Bachelor of Science in Finance and a PhD in Finance and International Economics, both from the University of Florida. One of the things I especially appreciate about Dr. Rivoli's research and writing is her challenge to us that to be an educated person in today's world, we must take the time to look carefully at the things we are consuming and buying. And as we look at that cup of coffee or that shirt we're about to buy, we think about the path it has taken through the lives of others to reach us. I'm very pleased that as you begin your path this year at Bryant, we have Dr. Rivoli here with us to share a few thoughts that I'm sure will further expand the context of looking to your future. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Pietra Rivoli.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation to Bryant on what I know is a special day for all of you. You know, this room is full. It looks like kind of standing room only, and at first I thought, well, maybe that was a tribute to me, but then I thought, well, no, as an economist, you know that if something is cheap, then you get a lot of people come. And I thought, well, maybe it's because the tickets were free. But then I realized it's because you had to swipe. So I hope as your first or one of your first required classes that it's worth the price of your swiped admission. Okay? I'm very, very honored not just to be here, but I'm especially honored that my book will be a part of your education for many of you. And I'm honored that there are some sophomores, I think, listening remotely who have read the book. It's such a privilege for this book to be a part of your college experience. It was never anything that I intended when I wrote the book. What I'd like to do today, I've heard you've already received a fair bit of advice, and so I'm a little bit hesitant to give you more, but I think that's partly what this day is about. I'd like to offer some thoughts about both the ideas that are in the book, The Travels of a T-Shirt in the Global Economy, but also some thoughts about how my experience in writing this book could have some relevance for you as you begin your college studies. One thing that I've been thinking a lot about in the past couple years, and that I'd like you to think with me about for a few minutes, is the question of balance. Balance in your lives along many dimensions, but in particular, balance between what you might think of your passions, as your passions, and the other side of your brain, which we sometimes think of as reason. So how can we think about this balance between passion and reason? This is sort of like, what is the balance between your wildest dreams and your more practical concerns? And the reason I invite you to think about that is because your time at Bryant necessarily has to be speaking to both sides, both your passion and your reason. So I wanted to begin just by relating my personal experience balancing passion and reason that led to the writing of this book. So from the time I was very, very, very young, I had sort of a daydream, and that daydream was that I wanted to travel around the world and write books. Right? I had a favorite author, this crazy old woman. I think she's still alive. Her name was Dervla Murphy, and she was an irascible Irish woman. And she lived in this small Irish village, and she was trapped there for many, many years for family reasons. And then she got to be about like 35 years old, and she decided that she was going to travel the world. And so she traveled the world having the most amazing adventures and writing a book about each one. So if you Google Dervla Murphy, you'll see she's written something like 15 books, okay? And she would write books about, like, you know, riding her bike from France to India, or riding her horse across Cameroon. And so she was sort of my idol. I really wanted to grow up and be Dervla Murphy. I wanted to travel the world and write books. And I must have read these books 10 times. And I'm sure that you have something in the back of your head like my Dervla Murphy dream, something that you thought about when you were a kid as your daydream, maybe. Okay. Now, for me, this dream sort of faded away as I got older, maybe as I got into high school. My family didn't really have any money, and it seemed like we were always in a very risky position of one kind or another. So the whole idea of, you know, traveling around the world on a bike or something, or writing a book, it just didn't fit into the definition of the feasible or the practical. Okay? But one of the lessons that I learned, and this would have been about in high school and college, is that, you know, you can also play it too safe. Okay? If you try to be too practical, your plans can backfire and leave you in an even riskier position. And this is what happened to me, because when I was in high school, pretty much the standard advice that women my age received was learn to type. If you can type, you'll always be able to get a job. Okay? And in particular, they would tell you learn to type quickly and without errors, and you would take typing tests, you know, how fast can you type with how many mistakes and so forth. And the whole idea was you were going to be fine as long as you knew how to type. So I actually did spend about 3 years in typing class. Okay? Now, of course, within 10 years, everybody had PCs and everybody had word processing software, and so typing all by itself was pretty much a worthless skill. Even then, you know, the world was changing much too fast to try to pin down a certain vocational skill and hope that that skill was going to take care of you. So the way, as I kind of look back, I realized that my reason side, my practical side, had sort of backfired on me. You know, I was trying so hard to play it safe that I had kind of instead exposed myself to all kinds of risks. Now, I, of course, went on to have an incredibly rewarding career as a business school professor, but I never really forgot about Dervla Murphy. I never really forgot about bicycling around the world. And as I spent my career at Georgetown as a business school professor, you know, every once in a while I would do something or take an opportunity to do something that was a little bit more like Dervla Murphy. But overall, I would say that, you know, as I went through my career as a business school professor, my reason side certainly was prevailing. But one day, I had the idea about this book. And I honestly, at that moment when I had the idea, and if you open the book to the first page, you'll see how I got the idea. I honestly had no idea if anybody would ever publish this book. Right? I had no idea if anybody would ever read this book. So it kind of sat on the side of my brain for a while, but I realized that even if nobody ever published it, and even if nobody ever read it, I could still write it. Okay? And so I took the plunge to do exactly that. So this was my gamble, I guess now more than 13 years ago when I started the research. It was a gamble kind of in response to my passion side. And so here I am today after writing this book. I did get to travel around the world, and I did get to write about it, and I did get to be here with you today. So my reason and my passion side, you know, over the course of my career, I think have balanced out. But I think the key point that I'd like you to think about is that if you don't spend a fair amount of time with your nose to the grindstone and listening to your reason side, then your passion or your dream side is often very difficult to achieve. I could never have written this book if I had just decided to graduate high school and travel and write a book. I wouldn't have had the intellectual preparation, I wouldn't have had the analytical skills, I wouldn't have had anything useful to say, and nobody would have had any reason to listen. Okay? So parts of writing this book were very, very hard, and you'll be called upon to do difficult things as well. Slogging through the academic literature, trying to get people to call me back on the phone, trying to figure out how a cotton gin worked. Some parts were very, very fun and exciting. You know, I got to ride a tractor, I got to walk through markets in Africa. The fun and the passion and made the hard work worth it, and the hard work made the fun and passion possible. So this balance between passion and reason, I think, is something to think about deliberately, not just over the course of 4 years, but almost on a daily basis. Because at any given moment or any given day, you usually think that you have to choose. You have to choose between, you know, doing your laundry or looking at the moon or picking up your socks or writing a poem. But over the course of your college career and then your professional career, you will not need to really choose one or the other. Bryant will give you the opportunity to exercise both of these muscles, and I urge you to consciously seek balance between them. Okay? The other place to seek balance is in your own ideas and opinions. And to think about how to do that, let us now turn to the travels of the T-shirt. Okay. What you see up here on the screen is the life story or the biography of my T-shirt. This is a T-shirt I bought for $6 back now, I guess, almost 14 years ago. I bought it on the beach near Florida. Okay? And I started to investigate where it came from and how it got to that little shop in Fort Lauderdale. Okay? So it was a bit like doing detective work. I bought the shirt and then went backwards. Where did it come from and why? So up here you see just a kind of summary outline of the t-shirt's life story. My t-shirt was born in West Texas, near Lubbock. Okay. How many of you have ever been to West Texas? Okay. There are only like 4 hands up in this room. Okay. I had never been to West Texas, and I can honestly say even after having traveled to many other parts in the world, when I first went there, it was one of the most exotic places that I had ever been. It was so different from anything I'd ever been exposed to. What you might not know is that Lubbock, Texas is the cotton capital of the universe. Okay? So the whole area is devoted to cotton. Thousands and thousands and thousands of acres. If you are not a cotton farmer, then you're a cotton ginner. And if you're not a ginner, you're a merchant. And if you're not a merchant, then you work for the university where they do research on cotton all the time. So there are places like this in the global economy that are incredibly concentrated, where they only do one thing. And in Lubbock, Texas, that one thing is cotton. Okay? That's where cotton comes from for most of the clothing that is in this room today. Most of the clothing would be coming from West Texas. Unless you're wearing something a little bit nicer, okay? We have a young man up here in your light blue shirt. Can you stand up for just a second? Okay. 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 It's a very nice shirt. It's got the polo guy up here on the left. Now, that cotton did not come from Lubbock. Does anybody know why not? Okay. Nobody knows? I'm going to count 1, 2, 3. Fourth person in, right there. Yeah, could you stand up? Okay. Now, he's just wearing, his cotton came from Lubbock, okay? So Lubbock, in the area around Lubbock, is known for short staple cotton that we make into rather inexpensive clothing, okay? If you want fancier clothing, then you need fancier cotton, and you need to go to places like Mississippi or California. But of course, if you think about the global market for apparel, there are a lot more people wearing cheaper t-shirts, right, than there are wearing the nice shirt with Ralph Lauren. So therefore, cotton in Lubbock is a big, big, big business. So this is where my t-shirt was born. Okay? That cotton gets baled and ginned, and for my t-shirt, it was sent in a 500-pound bale all the way to China. Okay? And in China, the cotton is spun into yarn, and then it's knit into cloth, and then that cloth is cut, and the cut pieces are then sewn into a t-shirt. Okay? Now, if you think about Lubbock and West Texas dominating the agricultural side of this, the process of growing the cotton, you can also think of China dominating the next stage in this production chain. China is, by any measure, the world's biggest and most successful producer of apparel. Okay? So most of our imported clothing comes from China, and most of our clothing is imported. Okay? In about 1990, about half of the clothing that we wore in the United States was made in the United States. Okay? Today, okay, about 2% of the clothing that is worn in the United States is made in the United States. That means 98% is imported. Now, what's with that 2%? Okay? Well, that 2% that is still made here is really almost just a kind of a fluke, because we have to, by law, make military uniforms in the United States. So a big hunk of that 2% is uniforms for the military, which are made in the US. So after you take that out of the equation, you come down to essentially a negligible amount of production of apparel in the United States. So just as Lubbock dominates agriculture in cotton, China dominates production of textiles and apparel. Okay. Now, once the t-shirt is made, it has to, of course, the cotton has to come all the way back, right? But now it's in the form of a t-shirt. Okay. Now, you might think that that's a simple matter of the t-shirt just getting on a boat and coming back across the ocean. But in fact, the apparel, as it moves from country to country, has to make its way through the world trading system. It has to make its way through the rules that govern trade in all goods and the rules that in particular govern trade in textiles and apparel. So a big part of the study that I undertook was to try to understand those rules that govern trade in apparel. Okay. So now the t-shirt is back here. Okay. What happens to it at the very end? What happens to it at the very end? Okay. One of the things that has happened as apparel production has moved abroad is apparel has become cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. The price has been falling for the better part of 20 years. Okay. When the price of something falls, we all buy more of it. So as the price of clothing has fallen, American consumers purchase more and more, and as you purchase more and more, you have to at some point dispose of more and more. Okay? And so in the global economy today, there is a large and growing vigorous trade in used clothing. Okay? So what happens to our t-shirts after we put them into a Goodwill or a Salvation Army box is they get baled up again into those 500-pound bales. But now they are bales of used clothing, and those bales of clothing are sold to businesses all over the world. Okay. The number one export of the United States into Tanzania, a country on the east coast of Africa, is used clothing. So they buy more used clothing from us than they buy anything else. Okay. So what I have sketched here really are three different global industries. There's a global industry in cotton, there's a global industry in textiles and apparel, and there's a global industry in used clothing. All a part of this very, very simple thing, a t-shirt. Okay. 3 global industries and 3 continents. Okay. So, what do you guys think about this map? Okay. Some people, okay, are kind of alarmed by it. Okay. In other words, it doesn't look like a happy picture. It looks like a scary picture. Other people look at it and think it's a very happy picture. So in general, this is a picture of globalization that could apply to many, many, many different kinds of products. Okay? Globalization often makes people very, very nervous. And one of the things I've become very used to in talking about the book is the very strong reactions that I get when I put this map up. Okay? Why not just make it all here? Okay? Why not just make it all here? Okay. Can anybody tell me? Why wasn't my t-shirt made here? Yes, sir. Because it costs much less to make it overseas. And why does it cost so much less to make it overseas? Because the cost of labor is so much cheaper. Okay? Now, I said that in 1990, half of our clothing was still made in the United States. Okay? So that means in this progression of the clothing production moving from the US to Asia, people lost their jobs, right? People lost their jobs. And so one of the things that this map often signifies to people is sort of that a spirit almost of destruction. Okay? If you watch this flow of goods going back and forth across the ocean, you can almost kind of see sometimes different things being destroyed. For example, is the environment being destroyed? Look at all these tanker boats and trucks and farm chemicals and dye for the t-shirt. Look at the environmental consequences of this very, very vigorous trade. What about the pesticides to grow the cotton? What about the chemical fertilizer? And so forth and so on. So for many observers today, there's a story of environmental destruction that they think of when they look at a map such as this. If you combine that with the story of destruction of jobs, you do have something that makes people very nervous. Now, conventional economics or conventional study of business would instead use this as a very happy picture. And instead of giving us some sort of feeling of destruction, instead somebody looking at this with the lens of a business person would instead see creation. Okay? We are creating jobs in a part of the world that is poorer. We are creating commerce. We are creating trade flows. All of these things that will, over time, improve the standard of living on our planet. Okay? So what I'd like you to just think about, again going back to this idea of balance, is that it's possible for people to look at this picture and have very, very different impressions and conclusions, even if they don't know much about the topic. And I think it's worthwhile for you to look at this map and just be honest with yourself. You know, what is your first impression of this picture? Is your first impression this is a happy picture, or is your first impression that this is a threatening or scary picture? Okay. Very polarized views of globalization are not new. Okay. St. Augustine was a 4th century theologian and philosopher. And he was, in this quote, having a discussion about whether there should be trade, okay? And whether one city-state, if you will, should be trading wine for fish. And what he is saying here, God did not make the sea to be sailed over, but for the sake of the beauty of the element. Okay? Use the sea for food, that's fine, he said, but not for commerce. Okay? So pause for a minute and think about what is it that he was worried about. Okay? Why didn't he want that ship to take the cotton and the t-shirts back and forth across the ocean? Okay? Well, I'm sure that his concerns were very close to the concerns that people have today. Okay? There's a concern about losing self-sufficiency. Okay? There's a concern about deteriorating livelihoods. Okay? So as you can see, for hundreds and hundreds of years, people have had a problem with pictures like mine. On the other hand, at about the same time, we have another philosopher, Libanius, and what he is saying is something that I think is very, very interesting because it so closely mirrors discussions today. He's saying God didn't put everything in one place for a reason. He put some products over here and some products over here so that we would have to trade with one another. And the reason that God wanted us to have to trade with one another was so that we would develop relationships with one another. This is a very, very early endorsement, isn't it, of one of the key value statements at Bryant. It's an early endorsement of the idea of cross-cultural understanding. He's saying if we don't trade, how are we ever going to get to know each other and understand each other? So rather than saying God did not want us to trade, Libanius thinks that God did want us to trade. So again, there is really nothing new about these debates over trade and globalization. Okay? There is balance to be sought. Anyone who looks at the picture and sees a happy thing, okay, has a responsibility to look on the other side to see from the perspective of those who see destruction. And anyone who looks at the picture and sees destruction has also an obligation to try to have a balanced assessment. Okay? So this tension between globalization and self-sufficiency is very ancient, but it's at the same time very current, and it will continue, I'm sure, for the rest of my life and yours. Okay? The map looks the way it does because of economic and political reasons. So what I'd like to turn to next is addressing some of these economic and political reasons, but also, again, given Brian's emphasis on ethical reasoning in particular, I'd like to invite you to think about some of the ethical issues or the ethical decisions that sort of permeate from my map, okay? And in order to do that, I'd like to introduce you to some of the people in the book. I bet you can't guess which ones are the cotton farmers. Okay. So what we have here, okay, what we have here are the people from the different parts of my T-shirt's map, okay? We can start up there on the upper left. This is Nelson and Ruth Reinsch, and they were, at the time I wrote the book, cotton farmers in West Texas, about 10 miles from Lubbock. They are now retired. Okay? Now I asked the question, why was the T-shirt made in China? And somebody said that, well, it's because the costs were low. In particular, the labor costs were low. Why is the cotton from Texas? Why is the cotton from Texas? Anybody want to take a stab at that one? Yes, sir. Cost of production is low. So we'd have to get one step behind that and say, why would the cost of production be low? Government subsidies. Okay. It's an appropriate climate for cotton. Do you think is that true? Do you know that? Or did you kind of is that a reasonable, yeah, okay. Actually, you know, West Texas is not an appropriate climate to grow anything. When I went there for the first time, and I asked, you know, why they were growing cotton there, I still remember a farmer who said to me, he said, honey, he called me, God did not mean for anything to grow here. Okay. It's a very, very desolate place, and it's really, the reason climatically that they grow cotton is because it's the only thing that can grow. So we've heard about production costs are low, maybe climate, maybe subsidies. Any other ideas why my cotton is from Texas? Yes, sir, in the back. Illegal immigrants who work the farms. Okay, okay. So that is not the case. for cotton. That is not the case for cotton, okay? That is not the case for cotton. Who do you think works on the farm? The answer is almost nobody, okay? There is essentially no human labor left in the production of cotton in the United States of America, okay? So Nelson Reinsch, okay, who farmed cotton until he was 90, thousands of acres, he did it all by himself, and he didn't even always have a full day's work, okay? And this is because the technology and the machines are so advanced that there is no need for labor anymore. And this is, of course, a key reason why we can compete in this industry, why we can be the leading producer, because labor costs are not a factor. All you need to grow cotton nowadays is the money to buy the machines. Okay? Now you need a couple of other things in terms of infrastructure. So let's think about why the United States would be the most productive and the best cotton producing country in the world. Okay? There's a great deal of science involved in the production of cotton. So to lead in cotton, you need a great set of universities who are doing research in cotton. We've got that. You need an entrepreneurial spirit. We've got that. You need business skills. We've got that. Okay? And you need political power. And this is where cotton subsidies come in. Okay? In the United States, about 25% of cotton farmers' incomes come from government subsidies. Now, this raises one of the ethical issues that comes up in the life of the t-shirt, because that is arguably unfair to cotton producers in other countries. So I'd ask you to think about that. What kind of ethical judgment might you make about the role of agricultural subsidies in our global economy? What kind of judgment might you make? Okay. On the lower left, we have a young woman. Her name is He Wanji, and she is in a garment factory in Shanghai. And she is sewing, or she is cutting the fabric that will be sewn into the t-shirt. Okay? For the same reasons that we talked about before, China is leading the global apparel industry. What I'd like you to think about, though, is the fact that up until somebody sits down at a sewing machine to stitch the sleeve to the rest of the shirt, you need nowadays almost no human hands in the production of a cotton t-shirt. Nelson Reinsch can produce the cotton with machines only. He never needs to touch it. The yarn can be spun with machines only. The fabric can be created with machines only. So the cotton, the yarn, the fabric, and now even cutting, okay, is done by lasers with machines. You don't have somebody sitting there with a cutting device. The point is, it's not until the very, very final end of the assembly of this product that you need labor. But when you do get to the end, you need a lot of labor, because nobody has yet been able to figure out how to substitute a machine for a person sitting at a sewing machine. I don't believe that time is so far off. Okay? I believe pretty soon you will not need a person at a sewing machine to stitch that t-shirt. But for now, you do. And of course, that is why it goes all the way to China. But this raises enormous ethical quandaries for many people in this industry, because the labor standards and the safety standards and the wages are nowhere near the level that many in the West would judge to be acceptable. So a second question for you to ponder is, how do you think about that? How do you reason your way towards an opinion? Is it right, okay, for the country's advantage, so to speak, to be based on a set of behaviors or standards that you would find unacceptable here? A second ethical question in the life of the T-shirt. A third ethical question is illustrated by this group of guys you see on the lower right, okay? You wonder who they are, I bet, okay? Each of them is from a different country, okay? Bangladesh, the first guy, United States, Turkey, another guy from the United States, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, okay? So it's a little bit of a United Nations meeting here. Who are these guys? They're all lobbyists for the textile industry. They have gathered at a meeting where I took this picture in Brussels, and the purpose of the meeting was for them to get together to decide how they could twist, bend, stretch, arrange the global trade rules in apparel to limit China's power. Okay? It's incredibly important when you study business to also understand where the rules come from, who writes the rules and why they're written that way, and what are the consequences. Every industry plays by some set of rules. And as we know in the United States, industry lobbyists have a huge amount of power over how those rules get written. And this is nowhere as true as it is in the apparel industry, because so many countries that are very poor have a huge stake in getting a piece of this industry. And so every day, all day long, people are fighting over what the rules should be. Right now, for example, a Chinese t-shirt has a 15% tariff, okay? We have to pay 15% on top of the price of the shirt. Is that okay? Is that fair? When Mexico, for example, if the t-shirt comes from Mexico, there's a 0 tariff because of NAFTA. Well, somebody has to write those rules. Who pays what on what kind of products coming from where? Okay? And a third ethical thing to think about as you enter into these discussions is the process by which the rules are created. Is it right? Is it fair? And finally, on the upper right, Jeffrey Malonge is a used clothing merchant in Tanzania. You see behind him in his stall all of the used clothing that you and I have tossed into the Goodwill bin. Okay? What could possibly be the ethical issue that is raised by this trade? Anybody have a problem with this? Anybody object? Yes, sir. So what bothers you is that somebody's making a profit on something that you gave away as a charitable donation. So that's an ethical issue, isn't it? Okay, to think about. Is there another one? Yeah. So if all of our used clothing is pouring into Tanzania, then how will they ever develop their own apparel industry? Another ethical issue to think about. So you think you're studying business, and of course you are, but at every step in this chain, there is an ethical issue to consider, okay? At every stage on that map, somebody made an economic decision, okay? But at every stage on that map, somebody also has introduced an ethical question that needs to be deliberated. You are going to learn how to think about these questions, both the economic and the ethical side, as you go through your 4 years here, okay? I think it's very important to always keep that balance in mind, coming back to the topic of balance. But I think it's also important to keep in mind that balance that I spoke about earlier between passion and reason. I'm sure everyone in this room knows that last spring, okay, more than 1,000 young women died when a garment factory producing many t-shirts for the American market collapsed outside Dhaka, Bangladesh. Okay? So now put yourself in the shoes of an American company. What do you do next? Okay. Do you say, I'm not going to buy clothing from Bangladesh anymore? I don't want to be associated with that? Or do you say, no, I need to keep sourcing my apparel in Bangladesh? The people, the work, the price is right, the quality is high. Okay? How are you going to begin to think about that question? Okay? Now, I'm a business school professor, and so that implies a couple of things. First of all, it implies that my reason side usually dominates when I think about questions such as that. But it also means that I do believe very strongly in the power of global commerce to improve our world. Okay? And I especially believe in the power of global commerce that reaches into the poorest parts of our world. Okay? And this is not just because global commerce has the ability to raise living standards and to help economies develop. It's also because of that thought that Libanius had all those years ago. As long as we are engaging in global commerce, we are talking to one another. And therefore, communication, trust, cooperation, all of the things that are required for a successful business relationship enhance, I think, the prospects for peace and understanding as well. Okay? So even though I kind of lean toward the reason side, I also have great respect for the passion side. Okay? The pictures you see now were taken at the protests that enveloped the world a dozen or so years ago. And these were anti-globalization, anti-trade protests. We've seen many similar types of protests since then. Everybody remembers the 1% protests of a couple of years ago, for example. Right now, there are protests going on in San Francisco against American retailers who source their clothing in Bangladesh. There are always passionate protesters on the topic of trade and globalization. What I'd finally like to suggest to you is that as you study business, you are not going to agree with these folks, because by your very nature, as an aspiring business person, you believe in the market system, you believe in the promise of capitalism to help improve the world. But that doesn't mean that these people and their passion should be ignored. Because if you look at the industrial history of the world, it is those that had a passion for creating social justice are the ones, these are the people who created leaps, big leaps in how business was conducted. Think of things like child labor laws, or minimum wage, or fire safety. These ideas did not come from business, unfortunately. They came from passionate protesters, such as the ones that you see up here. It is critically important, therefore, that business leaders respect and respond to those people who see things passionately. Okay? So my t-shirt then is an example, both personally and academically for me, about the balance between passion and reason, but it's also an example for you as you go through your education to balance economics with ethics and to listen to those who disagree with you. So I ask you or invite you to chart your course between balance and reason and give each the respect that it deserves. Thank you very much.
was a wonderful round of applause. That was very nice. We'd like to open it up to Q&A right now. If anybody has any questions, now here's something that you'll never hear me say in class. Feel free to take out your phones and tweet your questions. Twitter was actually down for the first half hour of this presentation, so that's why we didn't announce it earlier, but it's back up again. We have microphones in the two aisles here if you'd like to get up and ask questions, or you can tweet your question and I will convey that. Microphones over here, microphones over there. Okay, I've got a couple of tweets. One's asking, Dr. Rivoli, what nations or regions of the world do you believe will be the next emerging market?
What nations or regions of the world will be the next emerging markets? Okay. Okay.
Can we just can we just have some quiet for a few minutes while we answer the questions?
The next frontier is Africa. Okay? Africa is having incredible success over the past, say, half a dozen years. The growth rates are high. Governance is improving. So what I would hope is that, say, 10 years from now, much of our apparel will be coming from Africa.
We have another question. Do you believe that U.S. firms might reverse their outsourcing decisions and bring industry back here?
So the question is...
Can we please have quiet for our guest? Thank you.
The question is, do I believe that U.S. firms will reverse their outsourcing and start to bring production back here? I think wherever you have industry processes that can be mechanized, the answer is absolutely yes. So we already see textile production moving back here, yarn and fabric, but where there is a big labor component, probably not.
Most of the rest of the questions are all about the same, so I think we'll end it there. If anybody has any live questions.
Okay.
Okay, just give me 1 minute. Just give me 1 minute, please. I want to thank Dr. Rivoli for coming all the way up from Georgetown University. We have a couple of gifts for Dr. Rivoli. Can anybody guess what one of them might be? Bryant University t-shirt. All right. So, thank you all. Don't forget to swipe your cards on the way out, and thanks for listening. This big long thing, I'm not even going to say it.
Well, thank you.
I just bought your book on Amazon for today.
Thank you.
My best friend studies at Georgetown physics.
Oh, really?
Nick Quirk. I don't know if it's
Well, what's his name?
Nick Quirk.
How do you spell his last name?
Q-U-I-K.
Well, drop me an email once you've read the book. Let me know what you think. Oops, this is still on.
It's a great book. You'll enjoy it. Very compelling read.